Chapter 3, Lesson 1 of Geometry. We've looked at identifying angles when we have two lines that intersect or are being intersected by the transversal. We then looked at the relationships that are created when those lines happen to be parallel. What I want to do now is talk about proofs. We'll be doing proofs over the next couple lessons. And the two-column proof is the proof that I prefer. I think it's the most logical and the best way to kind of keep your thoughts in order. We looked at paragraph proofs earlier in this year, but again, I want to look at two-column proofs. And actually, what we're going to use are three columns. And there are 7 things that are going to be needed or required in order to complete these proofs. And so, again, I'll run through these fairly quickly on here, but you stop the video and write down what you need when you need. The first thing, these are the 7 things that every proof must have, and the first 3 we've talked about earlier in this year already, where you have to have a given, you have to have in there what you're being asked to be proved, and then you need to include a diagram. And once you have those 3 things, then everything else is used to put your thoughts in order and to create the proof. The next thing that you'll need then is, because it's a two-column proof, I want you to use a straight edge to make these columns. I don't like you to draw any freehand lines. So use a straight edge to make these 3 columns. Okay, and again, I'll do an example here in a moment. Each column needs to be labeled, okay, and then I'll show you what those labels are going to be. And then it's very important that the last line in your proof must match the prove line exactly. So the last line that says what in your proof should always be exactly as what it is in line 2 here that we're being asked to prove. Okay, that way we know we've proven it. We don't leave anything up for anybody else to assume. We make sure our last line matches that line, and then we know that we've completed our proof. Now, the 7th thing is this 3rd column is where you're going to connect the reasons that you're using to lines in your proof. In other words, we've been saying all year long that when you have a proof, the reasons have to, every statement must have a reason. And in a proof, we actually want to give the reason, but then we also want to tie it back to where in the proof did you have that reason when you used it. So we're going to use that to match the line or make the connections between what it is we have in our proof and what we're being asked to prove. So I'm going to do an example proof here for you, and we're going to imagine that what's above the line is in my book, and what's below my line, this white line, is my piece of paper. So my piece of paper is blank, and so I'm going to have to put those 7 things on my piece of paper that we just talked about. Now I want you to notice one thing, that we are asked to do this proof, and we're proving theorem 3.1. So we're being asked to prove that the alternate interior angle theorem is true, and you will be required to reproduce this proof on a quiz. Now it's important to note here that because we're trying to prove that alternate interior angles are congruent, we cannot use that as a reason anywhere in our proof. So that cannot be used in this proof anywhere at all. The only thing that we can use are postulates, because those don't have to be proven, and any theorem that in previous lessons has been proven, such as the vertical angle theorem. So we're going to introduce those 7 things that we need to in order to begin our proof. So if you go through those 7 things, the first thing on your list is we need to put down what we were given. So let's go ahead and enter into our proof here. We need to put on our piece of paper what is given. So what has been given to us is that that wasn't very good. What has been given to us is that A is parallel to B. So that's what was given to us. The second thing we're supposed to put in our proof is what we're being asked to prove. And this is important because this will be the only way we know when we're done, and this also gives the person reading the proof an idea of where we're headed. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and reproduce this diagram. That's the 3rd thing. So we want to, on our piece of paper, reproduce this diagram. So this is A, all right, this is B, and then I have my, whoops, I went above my paper line there, sorry about that, but that's T. This is angle 4, this is angle 3, and then this is angle 1. So I reproduced that. Now, the next thing that we're supposed to do on our proof is to use a straight edge to draw our columns. So we're going to need one line across the top here using our straight edge, and then we're going to use 3 columns. So we're going to need a line there, and we're going to need a line there. Now, the middle column should probably be the biggest because that's where our reasons are going to go, and then the first column as well. The last column can be the smallest because that's going to require or contain the least amount of information. The next thing we need to do then is to label our columns, and column 1 is going to be where we make our statements. Okay, and again, it's important that you label these columns so the person reading the proof knows where you're going and what you're using. The second column is going to be our reasons. So in this column will be all our theorems, definitions, or postulates that we're using as reasons for our proof. And then this last column is going to be our lines referenced. And you can use just an abbreviation there, lines ref or something like that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is all just a matter of setting up the proof and getting ready. Now, a proof is much like being a lawyer. When you have a jury, they don't have any information. They cannot bring their own thinking into the jury into the courtroom, and they have to reason completely from what the lawyer tells them. So the only reasons and the only things that we can use as our proof are the statements that we have. And you'll notice that right now our statements are blank. We haven't made any statements, so there's nothing that we can reason from. And when we work through our proof, when we get to the end, the only thing that we can reason from are the statements that you've put into your proof. Now, one tip that you want to do here as far as proofs go, and that is when you're looking at a proof, the first thing you want to enter in is what you've been given. That's the first evidence you want to enter into your proof. So the first statement is always going to be what you've been given. So we're going to go ahead and put in that A is parallel to B, and the reason we know that, whoops, this should match that. The reason that we know that because that's a given. Okay, so we know that A is parallel to B, and that's because that's been given to us as part of our proof. Now, once you've entered your givens in, everything else has to be reasoned from the diagram or from some statement that you enter in your proof. And the best way to begin this is then to do what we've been doing this year, is to start looking at the diagram and writing down some things that we know from the diagram itself. All right, from relationships that we know, being careful not to use the theorem that we're trying to prove. So I cannot say that 1 is congruent to 3 because that's what I'm trying to prove. I cannot use that because the reason for that would be alternate interior angle, and that's what we're trying to prove. So looking at the diagram, I know that 3 and 4 are equal because those are vertical. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in here. So I know that angle 3 is congruent to angle 4, and the reason I know that is because those are vertical angles. So that would be the vertical angle theorem, and you can use abbreviations in here if you need to, because again you may be putting a lot of information in there. Now, is there anything else I know by looking at this diagram? Well, I do know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 4 as well. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 4, and that's from the corresponding angle postulate. Okay, so that's something that I can use because it's a postulate. We accept it as true. There's nothing else that I need to know. Well, now you'll notice that I've created in my two statements here that angle 3 is equal to angle 4 and angle 1 is equal to angle 4, and that's what we talked about before, is creating that the two statements where two different things are equal to the same thing, because then I can apply the transitive property or substitution, because now I can state what it is I've been asked to prove is that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, and that's because angle 4 is in both statements. So 3 and 4 are the same, so what I can do is take angle 3 and substitute it in here for angle 4, and that gives me the statement that I was trying to prove. Now, what allows me to do that? Well, the transitive property allows me to do that. And again, that's going to be probably the most used property, is because in a proof, that's what we're going to use to transfer this congruent from one to another. So I've proven what it was I asked to be proved. I've given reasons for everything. The only thing I haven't done is this last column here, which says lines reference. And what I'm talking about there is this transitive property that we used in step 4. Well, the only way I could use that is if I had two statements somewhere in my proof that had that had the angle 4 in it. So in order to use the transitive property, I have to look to line 2 and to line 3 and use those two lines in order to apply the transitive property. So those would be lines in the proof that I'm referencing when I'm using the transitive property. So I'm using line 3 and I'm using line 2 in order to apply the transitive property. So that last column there is used to identify which lines in my proof I'm using as reasons uh, uh, for making the statement that I'm making. Alright, so that's how you would do a proof. That is the proof of the alternate interior angle theorem. So now I can use that theorem in subsequent proofs because I've proved it here. And again, you will be required to repeat this on a quiz or a test, so you can rewind the video and watch it as many times as you need it, but this would be the process for completing a 2-column proof, or what I like to call 3-column, because I add that 3rd column in there.